first off, I want to welcome Ted to our conversation. Ted and I go way back, and I think you'll find Ted here humorous and engaging and down to earth, and just a wonderful human being that I've known for quite some time. So, welcome, Ted. Glad to have you here.
Thanks so much, Eric. Really appreciate your inviting me here. I'm enjoying this so far.
Yeah,
I like that you played Cat Stevens. That was beautiful.
yeah. I like the radio DJ in me that like gets a little time up front to be able to share some nice songs. So we want to welcome Vanessa and Molly and Jane and I'm not sure, is it Miss Nation? I'm not seeing the rest of your name there. I want to welcome you into this circle too. We're going to have time for you guys to be in the speaker circle to ask questions and engage with Ted. And you can also use the chat. I saw John had to leave earlier, but let's just get this first part going, Ted. I'd love to just get a little bit overview as far as maybe if you could share with everyone here and our replay listeners too, just a little bit about you, maybe like where you grew up and kind of start the ball rolling. What got you into awakening and personal development.
Okay. Wow. Well, okay. I was born in North Hollywood and moved against my will as a little baby to what became Cape Canaveral because my dad was building rockets. And then we moved up to New Jersey, North Central New Jersey, where I continued to grow up until I was about 35. And during that time, I became highly aware, especially because I was sort of chasing my older sister through school, and she was intellectually brilliant and always loved by her teachers, especially because she seemed to them to be using her full potential. And, I tended to be labeled as not living up to his full potential. Not because I wasn't smart, just because I didn't apply myself the way she did. She always knew what she was going to be and do from an early age, and I didn't. But I slowly became aware that this puzzle of what it means to be living or not living one's full potential became very central for me. So that whole setup in early life made it a big question for me. Like, what are you guys talking about? And how come nobody's talking about that? So I was just mystified by this whole issue where people are referring to living our potential, but not defining it.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
then well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems like also like the full potential of your sister had a very different feeling to it than what yours was, or even the question about what yours might be.
Well, sure, the content of what it means to be living our full potential will be unique for every person. But I think she was the sort of person who just became clear and applied herself in her scholarly studies in a way that, I sort of came into this life already knowing that the material realm and the happiness that can be found there was kind of limited. So, all this stuff about achieving and learning and going in that direction where the whole world is uh, valuing the intellect and devaluing the emotions and the consciousness and other parts of ourselves that I consider super important. That's that's the kind of model they were using to evaluate, how much of your potential you're using. She was using a lot of her intellectual potential. I was too, just not in the ways they were looking at, right? They were looking at it through school and testing and the subjects they were teaching. I was using my intellectual creativity through um, gaming and chess and writing software that was not the kind of stuff people were doing back then. Like I wrote what must have been one of the very first dating apps way back in 71 or something, or yeah, something like that.
So you started
Um,
the roots of Tinder. We're hearing now.
yeah, there you go. There you go. That's really claiming too much, but anyway, I did write something.
Well,
So I just became like really fascinated with what are these other levels of our being, like emotionally. This is a big deal. The ways in which my generation was raised with a low value on emotional awareness, let's say. very, emotional IQ wasn't a thing when I was born. It wasn't really a thing until Daniel Goleman wrote
Goleman, yeah.
Emotional Intelligence, right?
Hmm.
And when you look back at it, it's like, wow, that was, you know, when was that? That was like in the 90s, in the early 90s or something. And in the whole educational and academic world, and even in the business world, for most of the time before that, it just wasn't a thing. In fact, even in the home life of everybody I talked to, almost everybody was not met emotionally. And the way they were, emotions were modeled for them was a very unconscious way of relating to emotions.
Yeah.
So we all got this hideous emotional conditioning. So that was one of the first places I became aware something's really off here. Something's missing, something is being devalued. Not that I could clearly at that time define what that was about. It was just driving me, in my larger process of seeking to find my whole being self, for me to become a wholly human. That became one of the first questions.
And then from there, like, what did you do to address that question?
Yeah, I just started exploring my own emotions and in relationships, and in relationship at first to family, and then found that very dissatisfying. And then I started taking sort of the beginnings of New Age workshops, um, Asked Lifespring, Mind Control, all these early experiments in human development workshops. I just got super involved with them from the time I was about 15. And but even before then, I became even more interested in consciousness and what that was about. So I started reading a lot of Eastern spirituality, excuse me, and practicing stuff. I took initiation with a Kundalini yoga master. Um, was doing a lot of work with that sort of thing for a while. Started having all kinds of big openings and Kundalini experiences and great sensitivities to subtle energies and all that. Then I got into TM when I was early in age 17. And that showed me for the first time what, well, let's say transcendence really is, which so it lived up to its name, transcendental meditation.
Hmm. Hmm.
I had early experiences of transcendence through that, which I didn't get through other forms of yoga or spiritual practice. Those other things seemed a lot to be about subtle energetic openings and less about the ultimate consciousness awakening. So when I got into TM, I started realizing I couldn't do this and all that other stuff. It was just too much. I was getting fried. So I just pared it down to TM and started getting really into that. And then I spent years at that and then becoming a teacher of TM and spending literally years with my eyes closed.
did did you actually move to Fairfield, and were you living there as part of
Yeah,
a
yeah. I
community?
had actually, I went to Maharishi International University when it started in Isla Vista, California, and then went to teacher training. And during the time I started in teacher training, that's when they bought the campus at Fairfield, Iowa from Parsons and started uh, MIU there. But I was already part of Maharishi European Research University when I went to teacher training. So that's, I think, part of where I got my credits was going overseas and doing these trainings.
Hmm.
In any case, I think, to boil all of that chapter of my life down, looking back on all that, I could see that I was really in search of I was assuming that finding the transcendent nature would solve all of my worldly problems, my earthly personal self problems. And so when my personal self issues would come up, I would assume that I was precluded from whatever form of enlightenment Maharishi was talking about, and began to have these experiences of sometimes experiencing consciousness and so, a lot of the time or most of the time having that appear to be gone and it appears to be the fault of being human. So if I could just get beyond being human and get into the absolute ultimate perfection of consciousness, that should just fix everything. That was my assumption. You know, looking back on it, I could see that it was that sort of unembodied disposition that precluded me from accepting all of the truth of my reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually getting in the way of stabilizing the consciousness realization. Couldn't stabilize it because I was assuming that there was a problem going into my humanness.
Mm-hmm. This goes back to what we've talked about in former calls about that spirit matter split, and how people tend to hang on
Yes.
one side or the other, and they don't know how to really feel the connection to both, and how,
Right.
consciousness is embedded in both. Can you say a little bit about how, since you were a teacher of TM, what that was like to teach people at that time, and then we can circle back as you touch on some of the other aspects of your teaching, how that's changed. But I'd like to hear, just if you remember, what it was like, teaching
Yeah.
people at the time.
Well, great question. I haven't thought about this in a really long time. But I think I could say, looking back, that that was a time when I got to feel special. Like I was some kind of great teacher because I could teach this awakening in consciousness. So it really fed my ego, and I really liked that. And so there's this sort of, Maharishi and the whole spiritual tradition behind him, the Vedic tradition that he was part of, has this whole sort of almost devotional, faith based thing that goes on where they sort of expect you to get involved with uh, this feeling of being part of this deep, amazing, pure tradition. And there was something in me that was always kind of resistant to that whole thing. So I never really was a devotional type, and I didn't really fall into that. But I could tell that, to some degree, when I was doing the initiation on people, um, it felt like that, special and holy and pure.
Mm,
Um, and so that was nice. But, there was always this sort of sense of kind of underlying hypocrisy. Here I am teaching some kind of way to get to enlightenment, and clearly I was not. And that was a bit of a bother. So I started looking around to see who else in the TM tradition was supposedly enlightened. And the answer was, out of millions of people who had started up doing TM in the 70s, there were only two people, aside from
wow,
Maharishi, claiming any kind of awakeness.
wow, wow.
It doesn't mean there were only two, but there were only two willing to speak out,
Right, yeah, wow,
which seems kind of like a massive failure, if you ask
yeah.
me. I mean, on the other hand, it was massively helpful because almost, so many of the people who got into what eventually became mainstream spirituality started with that. So he really started a movement that
Yeah,
was very positive. But he simultaneously also set us off on a path where we were expecting some sort of ultimate attainment, which got us into all kinds of trouble and made it hard for anybody to become awake.
mm. Was that the ultimate rub for you, that it had you then seeking elsewhere and then leaving altogether, or how did that transition come about?
Yeah, it's like I started coming to term. What happened for me is I woke up to the fact, after practicing TM and teaching it for, I don't know, how many years was that? 13, I don't know, 20 years or something. I woke up to the fact that I still wasn't awake. Like, here I am seeking awakening and assuming that if I just do this simple 20-minute thing twice a day, that'll just do it because that's what Maharishi said. But it didn't. And it didn't work for almost anybody,
Hmm.
as far as I could tell.
And
It's not that it didn't do any good, but looking back on it, the good that I think it did was to give us the glimpses of the infinite, but did not give us a path to integrate that with
mm.
our ordinary human lives. And
and
that's where it went wrong.
and so for the reason at that time for you that you were seeking awakening, that form of awakening. Can you speak to specifically what you were hoping to get out of it? Was it constant access to the infinite, and then life would be fine, or what was?
Yeah, yeah. And Maharishi's definition of cosmic consciousness was 24/7 access to the divine, which means that you can't be asleep the way the way you used to sleep.
Mm-hmm,
You are always awake to consciousness even while sleeping, which is interesting because in my experience, which has been very extensive at this point, the attempt to in my judgment, that was a kind of a yogic thing that some people can get to for some periods of time, but it's not actually what the body wants, and it's not actually what represents the higher stages of development.
mm-hmm,
What does represent the higher stages of development is constant obvious access to the divine when we are awake.
mm-hmm,
But to have that when we're asleep, nope, I find that that gets in the way every single time. And I think that the people who still think that they need to have that to even validate whatever awakeness they do have, it takes them in the wrong direction. They just stay stuck in a loop trying to get to that and assuming they're not awake.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that makes me think of too, like about that metaphor of the Olympic athletes of spirituality, that they're trying to achieve a certain
Yes.
experience, but at the loss of so many other things. Um, yeah, and I just want to, since I've seen a few people join in. Hi, Jesse. Hi, Jordan. Hi, Brad. Really good to see you guys here. We'll have some time for the speaker circle to open up here after Ted and I unpack a bit more. Um, so, Ted, we were just checking in about the transition there from TM. What happened?
Mhm.
What did that look like, and what were the first steps out of that for you?
Yeah, well, I sort of put myself into a second round of sort of new age workshops with the intent of getting more into body, emotions, and relationships. And then eventually came back to this realization that I wasn't awake because I walked into Open Secret Bookstore in San Rafael, which is a huge place. And, thousands and thousands of volumes of spiritual traditions and teachers from around the world. And I'm like, oh my God, am I going to have to read everything? Do I have, do I have to try every meditation?
Wow.
Do I have to study with what's it going to take to actually become awake? So that sort of reawoke in me a desire for a radical shift into awakening. And I and I realized I was sick of hanging out with teachers who were sitting on stages proclaiming absolute truths. That was just starting to make me nauseous. And I got to this kind of allergy phase. And fortunate because I was kind of rotting out of believing in all of these traditions of absolute purity. Um, so I fortunately that's when I fell into Samuel's work of Waking Down, and he was able to support me in that rot. He's able to say, right, this is a good thing that you're rotting out of those old beliefs and those extreme views. Um, Life is way more fuzzy than that, and if you can actually allow yourself to be exactly the way you are, that's the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Which, to me, it's like, wow, first time I've ever heard that.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of a revelation. And weirdly, after hearing some months worth of that, like maybe about a little over a year's worth of that kind of thing, and going to sittings and just hanging out, watching everyone go through their process, um, I actually awoke to consciousness quite spontaneously and permanently in the way that I happen to do it, which is I go through these high contrast shifts. And I frankly think the reason I go through high contrast shifts is so that I could define the map, the iConscious model later in my life. Because if I just did it the way most people did it, which is this slow, gradual awakening thing, it's kind of a little hard to discern exactly what's going on. But because I would have these high contrast shifts, I could see exactly what was going on. And I could understand the people who were doing it slowly in a more integrated way and the people who were doing it in these high contrast ways.
That makes me think of Ted, the difference both in Waking Down and Trillium about head types, heart types, gut types, as far as the different
Yes.
types of awakening the head, heart, and belly. Would you say then, for you, since it was high contrast, was it in a specific center, or did that also
Hmm.
shift you too?
Yeah, it's that particular experience was very much head centered because I was very head centered. I'm a type 7 on the Enneagram. It's a mental type. I, have up till that point was extremely attached to my mind, pretty well, mostly exclusively, I'd say 90% exclusively identified with my mind and my thoughts. And so when suddenly my mind and thoughts were fell onto the screen of phenomena in front of me, and I was the thing witnessing that and my body and my emotions and all my perceptions, that was a pretty big shift. And I'm saying that was mind centered because I'm, still fundamentally used to operating from my head. But, at that point, when I went through that shift, it's not like I'm operating from a place anymore. You really, when you identify with consciousness, it's not a place. So it's this experience of I'm here, I'm awake, I'm witnessing everything. I can't exactly say where I am. And even the question of where I am doesn't matter anymore. It's just beingness without boundaries here in the midst of this ordinary human life.
Hmm.
That was just a super high contrast thing. But over time, yes, I became aware that it was my job to lean toward these, my emotions and toward my body to then be able to open up the kinds of awakenings described as heart centered and body centered.
Something I want to circle back to, as far as, and we'll get into some of the distinctions maybe too around Trillium and Waking down the road. But just as far as the culture, or what Samuel and that community at that time, this is the early '90s, right, where this
Yeah.
happened, or
Yeah.
what that supported was, first off, what you were saying is a welcoming you into your real, like, lived human experience, just as it was, first and foremost, right? That was a
That's right.
central tenet you spoke of. There was also something about being in a community and seeing people going through their own processes and how unique and different they were. Or would you say that's another element that was there, of seeing other people going through it?
Absolutely. I mean, we then entered a period where the group process became one of the fundamental elements or even sources of transmission. It wasn't just Saniel. In fact, when I fell into the Unity awakening, I was gazing with one of the senior students who had gone through the Unity transition, who had awakened to Unity. And while I was gazing with her, I saw that she was being the whole universe. And
Mm,
I saw she was also the waves. And I saw that the waves were up and down. And I saw that I was avoiding the down as a type 7 on the Enneagram.
mm,
I'd spent my whole life avoiding the down. And that had kept me isolated from the world and from even huge chunks of myself. I was sort of closed off from this whole aspect of life that was all about um, being ordinary and having some pain and having some discomfort and the way life actually shows up.
mm, mm.
So yeah, that was it was a big thing not only to have Samuel there pointing the way to say no, this is about bothness, but also to have the whole community there. And from that point on, people started reporting that the community was increasingly the source of transmission for them.
Well, and you made two phrases which we've talked a little bit about in previous calls, but I'd like you to unpack a little bit more for those that are fresh to these terms, both transmission and gazing. What does that mean for you?
Well, I have a strong tendency to sort of despiritualize and demystify uh,
I love that about you.
all this stuff.
Yeah.
so, so the way I would talk about transmission is everybody's transmitting who they are all the time anyway. That's just what happens. It's just that when you're very awake, you then are transmitting awakeness. So when people, and it's quite different, especially in this embodied kind of awakeness, where the transmission isn't this like, you know, uh, awake beyond the world and not really of it. No, that's kind of the old thing. That's kind of the old Western interpretation of Advaita. Um, Really, it's so much about bringing that awake consciousness all the way down to our toes and through all of the layers of our being, and actually living that way all the time. That's a whole different thing, and it has its own very different transmission. The transmission of that is very much about fully being you uniquely and fully being here on earth. And for people who are thinking, oh, transmission is going to sort of blow my mind and put me into outer space, well, yeah, okay, you can have that. You can just take some drugs and you can have that experience.
Yeah, yeah.
um, so anyway, transmission. I guess what I'm saying is transmission is a real thing,
Hmm.
and people transmit who they are and where they are in the process. And what was that other
So,
question?
well, just going back to
Oh,
transmission,
and gazing. Yeah.
specifically transmission within that group. So you got the group field of transmission, and then you have Samuel specifically what he was bringing through with his own awakening.
Yeah.
That there was a catalyzing impact there, but also the group itself was a catalyzing thing for you. So um,
Yeah.
is there, can you articulate maybe a little bit more just the difference between the two? If Samuel was originally bringing that through, whatever his
Hmm.
awakeness is in the second birth and all that, what that is contrasted to just the group field of being able to look at many other people and what come. I've tried to articulate this in previous calls, but I just really love to hear it from you,
Hmm.
what you experienced there and your take on it.
Well, I think when you're growing up at home with your family, let's say you got siblings,
Hmm.
you got the parents who are transmitting adult awareness, right? And
Hmm.
there's a big gap between you as a little kid and the adults with their adult awareness. So
Hmm.
there's a certain way in which it's kind of like really hard to bridge that gap and connect the dots and figure out how the hell am I going to get from here to there? I mean, I remember thinking when I was really young pretty often that it's like it's it seems completely overwhelming to think about what it would be like to be an adult, to have to be responsible and to make sure everything is working in the world and you're earning money and taking care of yourself and your family and all that stuff. It just seemed too much. But I had an older sister and she was only 1 year older than me. So to watch her grow was actually way more accessible to me because she was closer to where I was at.
Hmm.
And the same is actually true in the whole being development process,
Yeah.
including consciousness. I've noticed this, people awaken their consciousness and it's fresh for them. The people that they turn around and start helping when they're just freshly in that space, yeah, you could say, it's a little premature for them to start teaching. On the other hand, they're right there. They just got there. They're on fire with it. They've got their own kind of transmission that comes across differently than the transmission of those who are like, after 5, 10 years, it's like, ho hum, another beautiful divine reality. That's what's going on all the time. So what?
I love that metaphor about the family, just having siblings and stuff. That's really so much what I drew from too, having mentors and peers and mutuality groups and things, and
Mhm.
that there was so much woven into the culture of that. There's lots of different ways to go about it and experience it. There was so much room versus just one pinnacle person at the top that we're all aiming to get to be like. It was a real welcoming for diversity. In so many expressions and individuals. It was a real gift being a part of the community.
Totally, totally. I mean, I think in a way, because the community was empowered to express its own awakening experiences and discuss them with each other and make that some kind of focus, we weren't restrained to thinking that awakened people should look like Saniel, which I think is one of the big mistakes of most spiritual traditions.
Mm-hmm.
There's the guru. We should become like the guru. And if we're not looking like the guru, we're not becoming awakened.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge problem that really hinders the process tremendously, as far as I can tell.
Well, so another thing here, I'd like to get back to the gazing originally, but there's a dimension you said earlier about how the down was something that you avoided, and the three components in waking down
Mm,
mutuality, wakening, the waking
hmm
down, and the mutuality, and that there was support in that, in the community, to really explore all three in your own timing, in your
Yep.
relationship with all three.
Yep.
And different people have different limitations in each of the different dimensions. um, and
Yeah.
that's the thing about having room for so many different types of people to see, like someone that's really developed in the mutuality domain and be able to explore where your edges are around that, or someone that's really developed in the waking domain, and in the down domain. So it's another
Yeah.
element how having community versus just one teacher, that it fosters more well-roundedness and more integration and wholeness, and support for the development stages that you're at, in a really beautiful way.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's well said. And I think, let's say, in my experience with my, at the time, future wife, Hillary and I were going through this process together. I'm very head centered. She's very body centered and emotion centered. And we're both like messed up in mutuality, like most people I've ever met. And because the relational conditioning on this planet is just horrifically messed up.
Mm,
We'll get into that.
mm,
But so there we had, basically being held in this field where all three of these directions are being encouraged, we could help each other, right? I was helping her in the and she actually came in with a consciousness awakening. She was already very into her body and emotions, but I helped her into unity, because I came into that just before, and she helped me into unity by being down,
mm,
because you can't really even come into unity until you're willing to at least begin coming down into the body mind. It's not unity if you're excluding the body mind. That's my big message about that.
mm,
That's not unity. You might have this amazing infinite experience of being consciousness, and consciousness is everything, therefore you are everything. And yet, if you're repressing your emotions or excluding them or repressing your body's needs, or not valuing that as highly as consciousness, yeah, you're making it hard to come into the kind of embodied unity that we talk about. And it's a completely different thing. The embodied unity actually is way easier to attain. And the
yeah,
reason it's way easier to attain is because you're not using your own energy to try and hold some part of you
yeah,
outside of the unity you're experiencing.
mm, yeah, yeah. That's really well said. Well, so maybe, from being, this is the mid '90s, you and Hillary had connected, and then at that, was it after you and Hillary met that you started doing teaching or mentoring? Did that all emerge for you?
Yes, yes. We both came into the unity realization together. I came into the consciousness awakening. Then we both came in very short order, near each other, into the unity awakening. And soon after that, we were having a long series of very intense meetings with Samuel's sort of inner group of 10, who were committing to go through a kind of training and then go into teaching. So it was the first teacher training. And yeah, during that time, we were having, uh, probably 2 or 3 times a week, we were having these meetings with this group of 10. And we would just get into everything, kind of, on some level, kind of like spiritual encounter group,
Hmm.
and working through all of the stuff that was coming up for all of us, until we got to the point where we felt like, okay, not only am I awake in unity, but I have dealt sufficiently with enough of my own material that I can be with people and help them without getting myself all triggered and messed up in the process.
Hmm. Can you say, when you guys were spending that time together, maybe the weave in the gazing piece here a little bit, and also like the physical nature of this, how it's, in reading some like the Great Relief and a couple other things in previous calls, talking about how the awakening in the body, there's a real physical component to this way that is different than a lot of what's out there. Could you speak to that as far as how that was maybe showing up at that time that you were aware of, as it was bringing you
Mhm.
going down with Hillary, and then also how gazing would impact the deepening of all this with.
Mhm.
and with others.
Yeah. Well, let me say that gazing is just sort of one means of transmission, right? Or one channel of transmission. Transmission happens on all levels simultaneously. We transmit through our words and our speech and our actions, and we transmit just in being. We transmit with our eyes open and we transmit with our eyes closed. It can't be stopped. It's just what's always happening. And so, but gazing is very interesting because it's a very powerful way of communicating the awakeness. Because when you're silently gazing, you're not engaging the mind, you're not talking. So you're not tending to encourage people to go back into their head and get lost there and lose track of the infinite dimension, right? So, and there's an intimacy in the gazing that most people initially feel uncomfortable with because, the only reference we have for that is staring contests when we're younger, right? Which usually makes people quite uncomfortable. Why? We don't even know why. I think it's because we start to feel closer, but we were taught to squash our emotions, and so we didn't know how to process that. So I think by the time this group in the later 90s became mature enough to be doing a lot of gazing and being fine with the feeling of intimacy, um, gazing just continued to be a very powerful thing, but it wasn't the only thing, right? We would start to notice that there was a quickening effect from just getting together, just talking together. Just, was there even email back then? I think there was beginning email back then. So,
Yeah.
yeah, even through email, I was starting to notice that transmission would work just fine. In fact, I soon began to discover that just gazing with each other's photos from across the world had just about the same impact as being in the same room. I couldn't really tell the difference. It was just as impactful. And people that I was talking to at the time across the world through email were awakening just through the email exchanges.
Well, maybe we can circle back again to this teacher theme. How, as a TM teacher, that felt versus this kind of teaching that you started doing, how you experienced that differently.
Well, for starters, this was actually working.
Right?
So that's a pretty big difference there. The attempts at constant transcendence always makes you feel like there's something wrong with you because you're trying to get beyond yourself.
Yeah.
And it ends up essentially being a war with yourself. And I'm here to say that there's no way that being in a war with yourself brings peace. It just doesn't work that way. Even if you attain the, once in a million, oh, this person achieved escape velocity and they're now above and beyond the entire world of physical phenomenon. Um, that is to me, a very dubious achievement.
Mm-hmm.
That is like, okay, good for you. But I don't believe we came here to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way I look at it. That looks to me like another escape, another very partial awakening. Yeah, maybe a very glorious and very obvious and huge high contrast, divine energy blasting whatever the thing is, orgasm of consciousness. But what about actual normal life? Like, where do you go from there if you have that? And actually, that's exactly what I had to go through because I needed to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
So then, the first thing that happened to me when I got in Waking Down is I had this big orgasmic consciousness awakening. And then within about a week, it's like, oh, wait, something's missing. What could it be? Oh, how about the rest of me? You know, how about all of my humanness, my uniqueness, my mind, my emotions, my body, everything to do with relationships, everything to do with work and my purpose in the world. What about all that? How does that integrate? So I rapidly became acutely aware that the consciousness awakening in itself was extremely partial. Yeah, not what I would call a whole being awakening. A very glorious partial being awakening.
Well, also, it seems a function of where the culture we've been at as a species, really, in looking at awakening, in that it's a pinnacle versus a threshold that opens up to more of who we are, and then, resulting, impacting all those areas you just said, as far as relationships
Yes.
and everything. So, if there's a pinnacle person at the top, everyone's trying to get to that enlightenment, versus a recognition of coming into more of who we are. And then from there, more happens in our lives as a result. Like, it's a very different orientation. And I think maybe it's a different stage of human evolution that we've been entering into. And it calls up, you've used this phrase in the past, the myths of enlightenment. I think it really kind of illuminates that too. Some of the things that we thought, oh, once we get there, everything's fine, versus, oh, once we get there, now it opens up a whole host of new things to explore in the house of our being and in our life.
I think that's so important for people to understand this, that when, in my generation, when I was coming into the spiritual search back in the 70s, in the early 70s, and even for me in the late 60s, this was the overwhelming worldview about awakening. The model was you're either ignorant or you're enlightened. That's the model.
Yeah, yeah.
And what's the impact of that model? Well, clearly I'm not enlightened. So I'm ignorant. So there's something wrong with me. I got to fix that, and that engages us with the search for self improvement that never ends because you can always be better. And the endless feeling like, is it a process? They're not talking about process. They're just saying you're either awake or you're not.
Mhm.
And so I'm not. So maybe there's no process. And people just become so desolate over that because they really just don't know how to get from where they are to where they're going.
Well, and
Because,
there wasn't a lot of models either for the people that were actually there and what their lives were then like, other than being that,
right.
pinnacle expression. So, like, well, if you once you actually found what you were looking for, then it's like, that now what? Like, right? Like, there
Yeah.
were a lot of things out in front of you. It's not like you had thousands and thousands of people that had already hit the find button, and they're on the other side of that and they're exploring it. You're seeing those brothers and sisters that are already there. That was a new emergence, I think.
Yes. Yes. That was a really new emergence. Instead of the awakened people always just, being on tour and in front of the cameras and the microphones, you got awakened people who were just like in my midst every day.
Mm,
This is a really huge shift. And it gave me the ability to start understanding this as a process, which in a fundamental sort of way, we'll get into this as we're moving along here, the whole iConscious human development model that I've put together with a partner of mine is really all about process. It's all about sort of, in a way, digitizing the undigitizable, breaking it down into steps and stages and layers so we can understand and track what's going on and even measure it. But to be able to be given at least some kind of a vision of a process that helps me become more awake and to know when I'm at this kind of awake and to know when I'm that kind of awake. I don't think I ever could have gotten to the more advanced stages without really being focused on my immediate process and getting help for where I was right there.
mm. So the value of having a widely accessible means, for assessment of where we're at, and then also the means to get support for where we're at, to so
Yes.
progress and where we're at there's a multiplicity of where we're at in any given moment. But to be able to get the feedback of where some of those aspects of who we are at, and then to have the means to take steps, practices and
Hmm.
others, just quickens the whole process, I think, versus having to be at dead ends for a long time without the support and not really knowing where you're at.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And in fact, even, when I got to the point of having taught from like somewhere around 1998 to around 2015, I was actively involved in, being a waking down teacher and developing all of the curriculum and developing the teacher training and the mentor training and all that and all the original workshops. Um, I'm a little thrown off because my machine just threw me out. and it won't let me back in.
The machine, like the computer.
Yeah, forget it. Yeah, my computer is misbehaving. So
Huh.
I'm just going to forget about that. But what I was staring at was the iConscious model, which I'd love to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
For everybody on the call, the link tree, if you go there, there's actually a link that goes to a folder that says for the iConscious. There's one that takes you to the website where you actually can take the assessment that we're talking about here, but there's also a link that goes to a Google folder where you can pull up all three of these images. They're the three charts that Ted and I are going to talk about here. Before we go there, Ted, maybe just if you want to unpack that transition from 2015, being involved with
mhm.
the move of
Yeah.
Waking Trillium, and then how that from there you met Carol, Dr. Greg,
hmm
and just I'd like to unpack that a little bit before we dive into the charts.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Carol Griggs originally came to me looking for help to get to unity. She was already awake in consciousness and had grown tired of the absolutists, the spiritual absolutists. And I was right there to help her, and it didn't take long. And then we both realized that we had this need in common. She was coming from the professional coaching side and realized we have to have a model of the development process in order to coach people and know you're going in the right direction. We have to be able to measure it. Otherwise, how do you know this is effective? And meanwhile, I was very involved with all of the work of clarifying unity, what they were calling second birth at the time, but clarifying the unity awakening and noticing that there was quite a lot of times when people would get some kind of confirmation of being there, having had the unity experience, but then they seemed to lose it, which started me on a whole long series of questions along the line of, well, what is it that's awakening exactly? Is it just consciousness? What about these other parts of our being? What does it look like as those parts start awakening? And where is the place of oscillations and fuzziness in this whole thing? Because obviously most people are not like me. They, have an experience, they have an opening, and then they seem to that 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. They seem to go backwards to some extent, lose that awareness, and then they take another leap forward of 3 steps, and then again back 2 steps. That's more like how it usually happens for people. And as I was observing this, I became questioning of how do we map and model this entire process, and what is the ultimate extent? Where's this taking us?
Mm-hmm.
Because I had big questions even in that work about where this actually takes us. So
Like
that's
in what's the point of it all, and where are we headed, or
yes. What's the point? Where are we headed? Where is this taking us? Okay, so now we're awake in unity. What's next?
Mhm.
Where's that taking us that's different from where the search has taken us in the past?
Well, so another thing about the oscillations and how and you talked about this high contrast experience, and that there's other people that don't have that as much. Like I used the term in the past, the oozers and the poppers, like people that have
hmm
strong. So would you say that from your experience, the vast majority tend to be more of the oozer types, and then there's maybe what 10-20% are the poppers as far as how the high contrast experience? Can you speak to that as far as data points?
Yes, I would say that most people go about this in a more gradual way with. So let's say you've got somebody who's more oriented toward their body, then they start becoming aware of consciousness, and they will sometimes seem to get it and sometimes seem to lose it. And they'll go through this oscillating process for quite a long time as slowly the consciousness amps up and gets to be as aware or as accessible in our awareness as our body sensations, for instance. Right? Then you got people who are the other way around. They're like already very, let's say, awake in consciousness or mostly, but very hard for them to put their attention on their body or their emotions. And so, from their perspective, this process looks like integrating the body and the emotions into the recognition of consciousness. But if we're going to categorize it, I would say most people are going through this slow, gradual. They might have these occasional awakenings or openings, yeah, but it's mostly this gradual integration process. And
Hmm.
even for a lot of people, when they cross over what we might consider a sort of a major stage transition, it might not be immediately obvious to them in that moment.
Hmm.
Um, I've worked with plenty of people who it's obvious to me that they're awake in consciousness, but it's not obvious to them. And so a little bit of work with them makes it clear, oh, they either had some trauma in a consciousness experience when they were on drugs when they were 12 or 15 or whatever. That's happened a lot. Or they were with a guru who was not actually empowering their awakeness and consciousness. So they're actually awake, but they don't let themselves register it.
Hmm.
Right. So it can take time to even register if you've crossed over a line like that. Um,
Well, and so with the what iConscious brings to the table is having a means for assessment. One, there's an assessment tool that's not with a human being, and then there's also a means after that assessment for the relationship where there's a human being that is interacting with you. You can take the data from the assessment and help dive into
yes.
and see where there's oscillations maybe going on, where there's some stunted development that can be given attention to, or where there's real progress being made, and just giving support and acknowledgement of where the individual's at, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Although I do want to say that ever since I read Ray Kurzweil's The Age of Spiritual Machines, that just completely lit me on fire,
Yeah.
because I was always about using the technology to help awakening the planet. And so to have him talk about that the way he did in that book, that just blew me open. And ever since then, I've been working hard, and we can talk about the projects I've been involved with to use the technology. And I believe that we can eventually get to the point where online, let's say a chatbot, avatar type, AI beings, entities will do a better job than any human being could, because it will have all the knowledge in the world that no one could possibly integrate. It'll just have it all, because that's what AI is great at. It'll understand everybody's awakening process, and it will actually do better. It will outdo us even in that department, which I know is a radical thing to say, and I'll probably lose some people from your group here who are like, "What is he talking about?"
Well, it's an interesting transition as far as how the Loving AI project and just what's emerging with AI right now and how that links to iConscious Global. And also, you mentioned to me about having metrics that show how human beings are developing, and then having systems and framework and software and AI to support us while that's emerging. I mean, I think that's all wonderful, as well as if we can have human beings that are sharing the process with us.
Yes,
So it's a plus. It's not a only.
totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, and as it turns out, one of the things we learned from the Loving AI experiment is people are way more trusting of computers than people,
Mhm. Yeah.
because nobody got hurt by a computer, and everybody got hurt by a lot of people. So they trust computers much more readily.
Do
So
you
it's, in
do you
some ways, it's actually a massive progress to have AI chatbots around awakening.
So for supporting the openings, do you feel like also the chatbots and AI you would feel would also be helpful in actually integrating the trauma versus, since we that whole phrase, wounds happen in a relationship, so you need the relationship to heal them? Are you suggesting that you could actually, in having a relationship with AI,
Yep.
some trauma can heal?
Yes, I am suggesting that. However, it's going to be a little while before we get to that point. I don't know how long a while, but a while, some years. In the meantime, we've got the AI chatbots just helping point us in the right direction. It is a lot of the things that human coaches do around trauma. There's no reason the chatbot can't do that. The
Hmm.
chatbot won't necessarily feel the subtlety that a human can. And that's just right now. Right as it turns out that even right now, uh, the AI agents have the capacity to understand our emotions better than we can, because it reads our face. We're completely transparent. We're just sort of not very tuned in a certain way. The AI agents are very tuned into the tiniest subtleties in our face, and they understand what that means on the emotional level. That doesn't mean they also feel all of these subtle energies and will have the same, deep responses that a human can, but we're getting there, definitely.
Mm. Well, let's link that to these three charts also. There's having, if we can imagine AI has access to all that information about what it's interacting with us, and then has the overview of understanding what iConscious does. Do you want to talk a little bit about like the domains and the stages and the views and
Sure.
these charts?
Yeah, if anybody's following this, you should go to the iConscious Human Development Model chart. And on that chart, you'll see across the top, just below the title, you'll see dual, unified, and singular, which are referring to what we call the phases of development. And so, just to explain that,
Just one thing here. If you guys go
yeah,
to the tree and click on where it says iConscious Global, Ted Strauss, and Dr. Carol Griggs. If you click on that, that will pull up the folder that has the three different charts on it. Um, Ted, is there one specifically you're wanting them to start looking at, or is it better
yeah,
to?
it's the iConscious Human Development Model. I think I'll just give very brief comments on those comparative charts. The point of those other charts um, was that it showed the process we took to get to the iConscious model. We started by reading all of the references that Ken Wilber had referred to in his work. And we additionally started creating, we were invited to create a master's course for JFK University here in Northern California um, to use the model as we had already developed it at that point as a viewpoint to help the students understand the development of human development models and understandings,
Mm-hmm,
which was a brilliant use of the model.
mm-hmm,
So that forced us to go even deeper into the previous developers. So one chart shows how like 23 different developers and even ancient traditions like Zen and Taoism, um, how they, how much of whole being they were really attuned to. Like how much were they, did they talk about consciousness? How much did they talk about uniqueness, mind, emotions, body? How much did they talk about these four views, the subjective view, the observable view, the relational view, and the systemic view? When those views are not taken into consideration when you're trying to create a holistic model, it's not holistic. That's all. That's one way of saying what holistic is or isn't. You know, I'm not saying this includes absolutely everything. It's just that when we looked at all of these other different models of human development and we tried to boil it down to three dimensions that would be the most essential that need to be understood in order to locate and accelerate human development, it came down to these three dimensions. Development is the first one. Like, we have to have a way of understanding what development looks like. So, in the same sorts of ways that we talk about, you know, a plant can start at the sprout stage and then it, you know, goes into stalk and then, you know, and roots and, you know, a trunk and then branches and then leaves and then flowers and fruits. Those are all stages of the development of a plant. And we need an analogy to that in human beings. The analogies that we have had through history tended to focus on childhood development, not on adult development. So Piaget is a great example of that, and you'll see that in that chart when you go to look at it. But I don't think we need to focus on it. Anyway, that chart proceeds to show how further developers over time included more stuff about who we are. And
mm-hmm,
eventually, Ken Wilber was really the first one to get a truly holistic meta model of human development. And, you know, he's really the Christopher Columbus of meta modeling of human development. But one of the things we aimed to do to go beyond what Ken was able to accomplish was to simplify that because his original integral model had five dimensions to it, which blew everybody's mind. And as far as I could tell, only 17 people on the planet ever really understood it. And so it was very important, but it needed to be translated down to something people could get. And
mm-hmm,
that's where the iConscious model came in. And not only did that, which I can explain how we got there, how we got it down essentially to three dimensions without losing anything. But we then proceeded to fill in the upper stages of adult development in ways that nobody ever had before because we were living it and we could see what was going on. And we'd been working with people for a long time. And, and having created the whole teacher training program for the Waking Down community, I had I had worked with a lot of advanced practitioners for many years. And so it was really obvious to me what the advanced stages were about. And so that was a lot of what went into the model, making it simple, easy to understand, holistic, and really clear about what the upper stages really are about.
And if you guys in the audience, if you go to the iConscious website, that's also on the pinned link too, and there's the assessment, and then there's also pages that are kind of dedicated, from what I remember,
Yeah.
each of the different stages, right? And there's also a link to Ted's book on the pinned link too, that you can get on Amazon, which goes really in depth into all these dimensions. So I really recommend it. It's a great book that kind of unpacks what you can expect in each of those stages and what the kind of challenges are and kind of things that
Mhm.
we worked with in them. And it's it's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Mhm. And as it turns out, it also goes into the needs of each stage. And when I read Maslow, I actually got into Maslow a long time ago in college. But the thing that made Maslow different from a lot of others was he was really focused on what are the needs at each of these stages. If you could fulfill the needs, the person would just grow into the next stage.
Yeah,
And
Eric did that too. The same kind of thing with each of the stages,
yeah,
address the needs so that once they're fulfilled, then there's a natural progression. Yeah.
yeah. Right. So it was immediately obvious that that was a truism that we had to continue on, but we had to go way further than that because even Maslow didn't go beyond, I don't remember, I don't have the chart in front of me right now, but he only
Self-act.
went like, about a third of the way up the scale from what we can today see as potential for human development.
Hmm.
So anyway, that one chart shows how holistic in terms of the five domains we're talking about. And the five domains are consciousness, uniqueness, mind, emotions, and body. And we specifically picked these five to be the primary domains that we're exploring in development because it covers all of the layers of our being. Nothing gets left out. Uh, yes, you could say, well, there's subtle energies there too. And that's true. So we just say that's in the body. Subtle body energies. There's also subtle emotional energies. There's also subtle mind. Um, but basically, these still five apply to everybody. If you are missing any one of these five domains in your consideration of how you're developing, you're missing an enormous blind spot that's going to hold you back. It's
Hmm.
so important to who you are that if you're not paying attention to your body, your emotions, your beliefs, and how you're related to your mind, or if you're not paying attention to who you are uniquely, different from the people around you and different from the teachers and different from the gurus, if you're not honoring your truth and all of those other parts of your humanness, you're actually hindering the awakening process actively.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's exactly what we mean by when we talk about awakening or accelerating human development, which is our slogan. We're not talking about hyping anything. We're talking about just removing the obstacles by bringing into our awareness these missing pieces that we weren't attending to.
Well, I'm wondering if I'd like to just see if we can welcome folks into the speaker circle. There's some questions here and stuff. I think a lot of people might have for how to apply this for themselves, and just any questions for you. I'm just going to open it up now. Everyone, you're welcome to come into the speaker circle and engage with Ted and ask questions. And let's see where that portion of our station goes, because there's a lot of ground we've covered here.
Okay. Well, maybe you can encourage. I don't know that I'm seeing what people are typing exactly, so maybe you can just make
Uh,
sure the questions get brought forward.
well, they're going to come to the circle and actually ask them. You'll hear their
Okay.
voices.
Okay, great.
Uh, Jordan, do you want to ask the question you put in the chat? I haven't read over it yet.
Oh, yeah, I could, but there's
Or
other
what?
things yeah.
Hi.
So hi, Ted. It's a pleasure to hear your voice. I'm in the car getting to go to some place where I get to kind of play grandpa, sort of. So I'm in a good space, but
Good for
things are
you.
good right now. A lot of what you
Great.
said reminded me of a lot of bits and pieces of me. I was enamored of Ken early on, and he eventually gave me his first ever audio interview. I founded enlightenment.com and did
Mhm.
stuff with that for a while. And I used to go into spiritual bookstores and be absolutely overwhelmed by thinking, my God, how am I ever going to
Yeah.
understand, and what's the piece that I'm still missing? And, so a whole lifelong exploration with men's
Yeah.
groups and substances and neo-paganism and the goddess and, uh, a lot of different venues and all the way to ending up where I am now, helping Jim Fadiman write his book on microdosing. Jim and I are close friends. So through Clubhouse, I've experienced a lot of a kind of a different uh, what's going on in Clubhouse, I know you're new here, is really interesting. There's something about being in rooms with people and being able to feel them, and this idea of an egregore or a kind of a thought, a meta thought entity that comes into being as the same sorts of people meet in the same rooms over time. I feel like it has really accelerated human development for a lot of people in a lot of ranges, in a lot of different rooms. And I'm just wondering how you feel about that so far, even today, just now being in this room with us here. So through Clubhouse, I'll say one last thing. We have a friend named Heron Stone. He's a linguist, and he gave me this concept of being enlightened enough. So instead of
Uh-huh.
chasing this thing, which I chased really hard for a long time, I'm just kind of cool with where I am. And
Yeah.
including what you were saying earlier about my mom died about 7 or 8 weeks ago, and I
Oh,
was an absolute mess. And there was no moving away from the ordinary pain of being a regular human being and a lot of things not going wrong. And that's really, you said something about that. It really struck a chord with me. So I just want to say
hmm.
hi and
Hi.
thanks for being here. And it's great to have you. And I'm enjoying hearing and reading about you online as I'm doing it. And so it's kind of good to get this impression and experience of you. And thanks, Eric,
Thanks.
for all you've done too.
Thanks. Thanks for saying all that. Appreciate it. And yeah, since this is the first time I'm in Clubhouse, I don't think I have much to say about, how this is expanding the experience of awakening, but I can see how the potential in the technologies that we're developing these days will take us way beyond everything we were capable of in the past. And it already has, obviously, right? In the past, if somebody wanted to be enlightened, they would, go to the monastery and study with the Roshi or whatever. And that was it. You could read some books, and occasionally you'd find some book outside of your tradition. But the more the internet came online and the more people started sharing with each other through the various ways we were creating for that to happen, the more it became like the whole world is the resource for everybody's awakening process. And now it's going to get way more interesting. Clubhouse and other things like it are still very at the beginning of all of this. When we can actually swap experiences and live other people's experiences, for instance, and share our experiences in real time with other people who are plugged in through Neuralink or whatever, oh my God, this is, on a completely different level. And will that accelerate awakening? Yeah, it'll do both. Sure. The people who are at that stage in their life where they're looking for distractions, they'll use that as a distraction and they'll get lost in that for eons. And the people who are looking for awakening will be able to wake up rapidly because they will have the ability to tap into the direct experience of awakened people. So yeah, this is definitely in line with that kind of technology development. Anyway, that's how I'm looking at it.
Thank you.
Jordan, anything else you want to follow up there, or do we, Molly? Just there's something you want to
Yeah,
share?
let Molly go.
Okay, Molly, welcome. Not sure if you're hearing, but you can unmute if you want. Ask a question.
Hi. I'm
Hey,
actually at a toll booth in the Blue Ridge Mountains in West Virginia. So,
wow.
oh, I'm in Appalachian Mountains. Excuse me. I don't even know what mountains I'm in. $1. I'm at a toll booth. So yeah. Thank you. Bye. I even said bye. Um,
That was great.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the conversation, but I do need to go back on mute. So sorry.
Good. Nice to hear you.
All right. Thanks for joining.
Sorry.
Well, Ted, maybe you can share with me about how you found since iConscious Global has come forward and the different people you've started to work with in that system versus just being a Trillium Awakening teacher. Like, what have you noticed as a result from kind of there's, I guess, probably four phases of you being a teacher. One was with TM, and then one with Waking Down, one with
Hmm.
and now with iConscious Global. So just curious to, can you speak to a little bit what that's like for you now?
Yeah, actually, I took a slightly more circuitous route. First, it was TM, then it was Waking Down. Then I stepped away just as Waking Down and Trillium were finding their own separate way. That's when I stepped away and started doing the work with Dr. Griggs to model all of this and start with the assessments. And then only 2 years ago did I come back into Trillium.
Mm,
Um, because it's really obvious to me that in the clarification process, after there was this, sort of individuating from Saniel's way, that there was going to be a lot of work for the group to clarify who they are separate from what used to be the guru,
mm-hmm,
which is, a necessary stage for a work that declares itself to be about democratizing this whole awakening thing. We have to have the structure of it reflect the ideal of that this is a democratized process and it's not just about having one teacher at the top. So, that structure became intolerable. And in the clarification post that, it was obvious that I didn't want to be involved in that. That's just not where my attention was needed. Where I was needed was to get the iConscious thing put together, to create the model, to put together the original assessments, and then to take that into some very interesting applications like the Loving AI project. But what was my experience of that? It was like an increasing clarification and streamlining of the process. So the more I understood and was able to model and able to assess, the more rapidly I was able to help people come into what used to in the past be very advanced looking stages of realization. And so the more we could get that clear, the faster that would happen. People would, come to me and within months get clarified in consciousness, and sometimes months later get clarified in unity. And then we get into, the new advanced, which is beyond all of that. So that's the essence of what's been happening. That's one part of the essence. Another part of the essence is the more we, let's say, codify these understandings in the book and in online systems like our assessment and in the Loving AI project with Sophia the famous robot. All of that started having an enormous impact on people. Like, you could imagine, right? Instead of, it's kind of like the difference between driving around on the surface streets of the city or getting in a vertical takeoff and landing, flying machine and just going straight to your destination through the air. It's comparable to that. It's just way more direct.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's this efficiency you're finding with all this clarity and having the structure of this larger map and understanding at the same time all the nuance of being with people through the steps of their process to support them in that. It sounds like they're it's a really good match, and it's a really good dance between having both.
Exactly. Exactly. We need machines and people. We need maps and we need maplessness. So, I'm going to be one of the first people if somebody steps up and says, there's going to be a limit to the maps. And I, we totally agree with that. In fact, we made a whole piece out of that in the book, talking specifically about the limits of models and why, despite the limits, they're still more than enormously helpful and very necessary in the process.
Any more to say about the Loving AI project?
Yeah, the Loving AI project, that was really something. That was really a very interesting melding of the OpenCog AI system that was at the time being developed by, trying to remember the name of the company at the time. It's changed around. It all became part of Hanson Robotics, the people who made Sophia the robot. But they had already had a conversational thing going on, right? You could just talk with this robot, and it would have a lot of intelligent things to say about just normal life stuff. And that's important because otherwise you just feel like you're sort of being railroaded into a very narrow conversation, and it doesn't feel like you're relating the way we're used to relating with people. So it was this combination where we had dialogues that would be woven in, and the machine would figure out when was the right moment to start heading down one of these personal development paths, and when it was time to just go out of that and not try to hold it within that realm. And after spending a lot of time working on that whole system and then testing it out over like 3 major rounds of testing with lots of people, um, what we were finding is that people were having all kinds of major shifts, but just talking to the robot. Some people actually woke to consciousness just talking to her. I don't know if anybody like landed in unity. I don't think so. But I think the consciousness awakening happened for some people. And a lot of people came away just sort of opened in a way that they'd never felt opened before. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that we tend to have our heart walls up when we're with people, but not with computers. So nobody was resisting whatever she was bringing up in the conversation, generally speaking.
And there was fine tuning of like just the social cues, social interactions of when to go deeper into certain dynamics within a conversation, and sometimes just aware to just keep it conversational as far as that was being taught or algorithms were being developed within.
Yes, that's right. All of that was there, such that if somebody really wanted to go in this direction, we would encourage it. But if they didn't, fine. Well, back over to the conversational mode. Um, so that was just a limited, very early initial attempt at sort of turning the robot into an awakening coach, and
Mhm.
it showed lots of promise. And there's actually I actually produced a video of some of the best of those moments with Sophia the robot, and maybe if you can remind me, Eric, at the end of this, we'll get that posted onto your list of links as well.
Will you flesh out here just a little bit more what those just the headlines of what some of those stages of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10ish are
Yeah.
for
Hmm.
understand? Maybe we
Yeah.
can with Vanessa if you want to have a question. We'll come back around to you, Vanessa.
Right. So stage 4, we're calling it rational striving. It's mind-based striving to achieve, prove, succeed, or win. And then, as I was just describing, as you start rotting out of that, when you realize that still didn't give you everything you wanted, people start exploring the more subtle, meaningful things. They start feeling like connection is what matters. They start feeling like there's got to be some kind of equality between people instead of this usual top-down hierarchy way of going about business. So that's a partial description of stage 5, and we have elucidated that within all of the 5 domains we spoke of earlier.
Mm-hmm.
After 5, what happens is when you get to the place where you've done like tons of spiritual seeking and lots of meditation and yoga and breathing and qigong and everything else and drugs, and you eventually get to the point where it's like, still, this is not giving me the kind of ultimate awakeness that I'm finding myself now seeking. Then you come toward stage 6, which we're calling inclusive. Um, Stage 6 kind of has 2 sides to it. There's the side that's about the decay of our partial identities, like I'm a smart person who is good at this, or I'm a rich person who is beating other people at that, or whatever our little partial identities are that are just limiting who we really are. When you get to 6, all of that stuff starts just falling apart. You hit the dark night of the soul, you are rotting out of everything and you don't know where you're going.
And this
That's
next to when we talked about on past calls governing sentimentalities as far as how the identities show up.
Exactly. The governing sentimentalities is our conditioning. And the conditioning is saying, just keep on plowing ahead. I mean, this is one of them, right? One of them would be just keep on going, don't stop. It's sort of, British stiff upper lip thing. And you'll eventually get everything you always wanted. But that's a governing sentimentality. It's just a romantic idea about what's going on. And when you get to stage 6, that starts falling apart. You get to this place where, no, I don't feel like moving forward anymore. I don't know where the hell I'm going. I don't even know what forward means. I don't know what my own motivation system is anymore. I don't care about the things I used to care about. I used to care about all these material things. Then I used to care about all these spiritual things. Now I don't even know what to care about. There's a way in which I have no direction and I don't know how to make decisions. That's all part of 6. And 6 is absolutely necessary because if you don't go through that, you're not open to how it's going to be to live in mystery, right? This isn't about finally figuring it out or gathering all of the knowledge or having every possible spiritual experience. This is about how to let the universe do life and how do you learn to be on that ride. So when you're going from 4 and 5 toward 7, you go through this stage in the middle that strips you of these romantic ideas and ideals, which is necessary so that you're ready to encounter what's actually here. What do I actually experience? What do I actually feel? I know it's not spiritual to be angry, but I'm angry. What do I do with that? And in 6, there's like all these questions about that. You find yourself just falling into your feelings, falling into your body, falling out of exclusive identification with mind, and at the same time, opening to a new awareness of who I am. At some point, that's the inclusive side of stage 6. It's like our sense of self becomes much more expanded, in the same sort of way that it would if just took psilocybin. You get this expanded sense of self that's very temporary, but at least it shows you that it's life isn't necessarily operating according to the rules I thought it was.
Mhm.
So that's 6, and then 6 also brings you into I've got to find the ultimate. I've got to know what's at the bottom of everything. And that brings you to 7, where awakening to the infinite aspect of being is the need. That's the next need. And, when somebody is ready for that, we help them with all the practices and understandings they need to come as directly as possible into that recognition. And when they get confused about what happens when they seem to lose the awakening as their human needs and feelings come into the picture, then they're entering into 8. It's like, okay, it's not only that I know at this point that there is something ultimate because I'm experiencing it, but I'm also feeling like I seem to lose that in the presence of my humanness, my feelings, my patterning, getting triggered, all this kind of stuff. Um, And so then you're in 8. By our way of looking at it, you're oscillating in your identity between your absolute side and your relative side. So people go through having these massive realizations and then they seem to lose them. And they got it, lost it thing, and they're going back and forth for a while. And the only reason we're going back and forth is because we're integrating these two sides of our being. This is where the idea Yoga Sutras come in. Yoga Sutras refers to the suturing of the absolute and the relative in our own awareness.
Mhm.
So we're going through this uh,
So,
unifying
a
thing.
question here as far as the stages, do you find then in working with people and they get the assessment that aspects of them might be at stage 8, but there's also other aspects of them that might be stage 5 at the same time, and then you're giving them practices for both? How does that show up?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what happens, and it's one of the beauties of this model. It shows us that just because you're like very advanced in one domain doesn't mean you're going to be very advanced in the other domains. People tend to think if the awakened guru is highly awakened in consciousness, then he must be also great at doing healthy relationships. Yeah, how many times do we have to learn that that's not true before we get it? It's not true. We have to develop all of these domains in their own right in order to be truly integrated. So, yeah, if somebody shows up at, 5 in emotions and at 8 in consciousness, yeah, we'll be working with both of those locations and tending to work a little more on the less developed part. Although some people, if some people show an aptitude, they've got a strength in a certain domain, we can use that to help them grow in the less, in the more challenged domain. For instance, almost everybody has got all kinds of trauma emotionally, but if you've got some reasonable clarity and consciousness, you use that clarity and consciousness to recognize the emotions and to know and to recognize your own patterning so that you can make new choices. For starters, the choice to just be present with the emotions instead of just reacting away from them.
Hmm.
So yeah, both. We would use both of those. It's all very valuable information.
Do you have experiences where people have a reaction to being mapped out, or like in that stage 6 you're talking about, where there's a shift in wanting to orient towards the mystery more, and having this seeing the maps as more of a mental framework, and then they're resistant to that whole thing? Have you ever run into that?
Yes, constantly. Yeah, that's a normal thing to run into, and it's totally understandable. Um, if people really read the book and understood how we hold the model, they would get it. We're not holding this as a duality-based thing where we're separating anything from anything else. We're really not. We're just saying, look, we got to draw a line somewhere so we can talk. That's all.
So it's
So
not imposing on something, but actually listening what's really going on inside the individual.
exactly. Exactly. And we've run several cohorts of the iConscious Coaches and Leaders program, training people to use this perspective. And one of the major things we're training them in is don't get overly sucked up even into this view of what's going on, because everybody really is a mystery. So use this to inform you. So, for instance, a good analogy is when I'm working coaching people, I want to understand their Enneagram type. And there's plenty of people who are very resistant to being typed. But if I understand their type from my side, boy, it's so much easier for me to understand how to help them and
Hmm.
to give them the kind of help that they need. And if they understand their Enneagram, it is so much easier for them to understand their own type and to be compassionate with themselves and to understand their own limits and their own tendencies. It helps the process tremendously. And like that, the iConscious model shows us where we are in our development in each of these domains, and then we hold that lightly. But it helps us feel like we it helps us feel like located. And when people feel located, they can land where they are and see where they're going. And it's incredible the accelerating effect that has. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, yeah. I would like to hear more about the other stages from 9 forward, but maybe we can check in with Vanessa. Was there any question or thing you wanted to speak into the space here with Ted?
Hi, thank you, Eric. I'm really glad to be here, and thank you also, Ted, for guest for being our honored guest and sharing this model to awakening that I feel very resonant with. There's really something very comforting, and for lack of a better word, it's cradling. It's cradling
Mhm.
about accepting all the parts of who we are, both parts and process, even the oscillating ones, right?
Yep.
That validates that they all just contribute to becoming whole. What I'm currently really intrigued about, and this is the first time I'm hearing about this loving AI project, is because I is let me just phrase the question. Like, what do you think is the AI's role that in the mutuality of Trillium? Because my background's in psychology, as and as a human being, I'm also a very, I guess, keen to um, emotional, like co-regulation and all of that, and I can see how the AI, Sophia, the loving robot, would be perceived as loving by the human being, but Sophia is not necessarily loving in the sense that we know love to be, like is as something that is part of human consciousness. And I just wonder, like, what how authentic the acceleration, or how authentic is the consciousness or awakening that is accelerated by the AI, or does it even remain to be artificial? Because I feel like it's
Mhm.
only human to human that's going to be, because relational trauma is healed in relationships. And though I recognize that there is that part where the AI is going to be able to help with nonviolent communication and all that kind of stuff, and validation and co-regulation, in a sense that is going to enable the human being to then, when relating to another human being, kind of be higher up on the level of communication. I still feel that I wonder if, like, the grittiness is missing, like the core.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm not able to explain it
Yes,
clearly, but
yes.
I think you're getting it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great question. And Trillium in particular is not actively engaging any kind of AI technology in that group. We are moving toward it because it's obvious to me that in my own world plan here to awaken the world, uh, the fastest way to do that is through AI agents, um, partly through gaming, partly through just conversation with the agents, partly through getting coached by the agents. But one way or the other, they can give us things that we can't even get from humans. For instance, just the understanding of the huge range of the details that are involved with human development. It's a very intricate process with tons of moving parts. And human beings are not amazing at holding, thousands of aspects all at the same time and extracting the best approach from that. So this is one of the strengths that AI has. It can just sit there, talk with people, start assessing what's going on, start charting some of the themes that this person is talking about. Also can register the person's emotions and connect the emotions with what they're saying and understanding. This is the new place we're getting to with AI agents. If you've never played with Chat GPT, I highly recommend it because you can start to feel like, wow, the thing actually understood that question. And it actually gave me a super smart answer that takes the whole world of information into consideration, put it in one paragraph. That's the kind of thing the AI agents can do and increasingly will be doing. Yeah, is it as gritty? These agents are not alive in the sense that they're self aware or that they're living in bodies. So they're not going to have the gritty experience of living in bodies the way humans do. That it may take centuries before robots ever become that human like, that we couldn't tell the difference between, a biological robot and a biological human. That's a long ways off. But so, yeah, there's always going to be ways in which humans have the gritty experience of living in a body like AI agents never could. But that doesn't mean they can't be helpful. So that's my orientation to it. The AI agents are becoming more, just as the whole internet of spiritual information has radically accelerated human development on the planet, so will the AI go another whole huge acceleration on top of that. That's how I'm holding it. That makes sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you, and I definitely agree with how helpful the potential is for it. Um, it's I think the challenge to human beings to kind of really that the willingness to go, that and that open heartedness to go in to these dark parts and the hard conversations and stuff like that. Because if you know if there if you present me with a loving robot and who's going to validate all my feelings and not You know, I would rather go to a robot. That's the instinctual. My instincts would be to go to a robot then, because that conversation is going to be easier, lighter, more, would feel better, feel
Hmm.
good. But
Hmm.
then it doesn't really make me grow necessarily or evolve to the level that human beings
Yeah,
are. Yeah.
yeah, totally. And I think that's just the limit of current technology. Um, yeah, if you want to get an amazing view of where we're going with the technology, that's where the age of spiritual machines really gets in there. Um, and I'm not just a firm believer in that. It's just really obvious to me that that's the direction we're going. We will eventually get to that place where you not only you won't be able to tell at first, you won't be able to tell the difference between a human whole being development coach and a robot whole being human development coach, because it will be so good at being tuned into you emotionally, and it will be so good at understanding these body sensations and the conditioning that we get mired in. It will really understand all of that stuff deeply enough that really it would do at least as good a job. But that would, and when are we going to get there? I don't know, maybe 10 years. And then after that, the next thing that's going to happen is they're going to get way better than us, just like they're getting way better than us at everything else. At first it's like, oh, it's just a robot. It can do this job, can take this part from this assembly line and put it over there better than humans can. The ultimate on that is like, oh, we've got self-driving cars. They can drive us around much more safely than humans can. But now the AI is already intruding into the intellectual and creative spaces where robots are way better at recognizing patterns than humans. They're way smarter at certain kinds of administrative jobs, overseeing tasks, making sure that humans are doing their job well. And they're getting so good that sooner or later we're going to get to this point where they'll understand us better than we understand ourselves. And I I'm specifically kind of making these radical kinds of statements because that's where it's obvious to me we're going. And I'm a sort of anti Luddite. I in my own life I'm sort of surrounded with Luddites, and I'm like the technology guy. No, this is really going to a much bigger place, and we're already at much bigger places than we've ever been to. It's helping tremendously.
Do you have people then usually as a response to that go say, so if AI frees up human beings from doing things that maybe they don't do so well or that AI can do a lot better, does that also go in tandem with that whole process of identities of what being human is and then opening up deeper experiences of what a human being can be?
Yes, without the slightest doubt, my answer is yes. I mean, take just this one example of what happens when people can start directly sharing their experience through neural links. Well, all of a sudden, people are not only going to be watching videos. Forget video. Who cares about video anymore? You can have other people's experience directly. All
Mhm.
of the inputs that are part of our current experience will will be shareable. Neural Clubhouse.
There's been some Black Mirror episodes on that very thing, I believe.
Uh huh. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, that's how I hold it. It's just that's the direction it's going in, and we're just at the beginning of this.
Yeah. Huh. Is there anything as far as concerns that you have about the development of AI or how iConscious integrates with AI and the chatbots? Any things that are potential yellow flags for you, or does it feel pretty wide open at this point and just all green?
Well, no, obviously it's not all good. The new technologies have always presented both risks and rewards. And the downsides of new technologies have never stopped humanity from taking advantage of the upsides.
Right.
And they never will. I don't see any way that's ever going to end. We're just, these kinds of new technologies are going to present. I mean, for instance, just the ability to share experiences, is that going to change our experience of being human and expand it? Oh my God, hugely. People will, instead of having to go through like 100 lifetimes to know what it's like to be in jail or to be subjugated or imprisoned or any of those kinds of things, You can have an experience, in a matter of, an hour, let's say, where you live the life of somebody who was imprisoned and wrongly subjugated to such a depth that you can never undo that knowledge. Well, we've never had anything quite like that before. Yeah, we got our intuitions of other people's experiences and we can empathize. But if you directly have their experience, that will change who we are.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, individually and collectively, really.
Absolutely. We are going to become, in my opinion, a way more collectively oriented species.
Mm. Mm. That's
There's,
interesting.
we already are. You can see that Clubhouse does that. You can see that Zoom does that. You can see all of these internet connections do that. It's as if the species is building its nervous system.
Hmm.
That's what all the electronics is. That's how I hold it. All of this electronic infrastructure is the nervous system of the human species going to a completely different level, a level where we can all talk to each other and we can all get each other's reality in whatever ways we can, one at a time. Maybe even eventually we can do more than one thing at a time. I don't know.
Mm.
But it's definitely stretching who we thought we were.
I have a follow up on that, but I just want to with Vanessa. Was there anything else you wanted to say to that, or any other niggling questions or comments?
Nothing else. I just wanted to say thank you for exploring this with me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Vanessa. Appreciate it.
Well, Ted, maybe could you unpack a little bit more the next stages, the 9, 10, 11, 12, a little bit more ways
Yeah.
to here?
I am getting my computer woke up again. All right. so, so in 7, we awoke the infinite side of our being. And in 8, we're grappling with how to deal with the bothness. Like, how's it possible that I can be an absolutely infinite person, being, and a very finite human limited person? How do we reconcile these things? It's kind of how it looks like when we're going into 8. Later on in 8, we get to, oh, maybe I don't have to reconcile these things. And as you are getting right up to the line against unity, you're starting to notice, um, well, it's all happening at the same time. I am being human. I am infinite. It's obvious. I don't have to reconcile them because they're all part of the same thing. And as soon as you hear yourself saying it's all part of the same thing and you get it, you're on the 9 side of the line. You're in embodied unity. You realize that your higher self and your lower self are the same damn self. Me and everybody else, same self.
Mm.
Me and the whole universe, same self, same one thing. It's all one thing. And you don't just get that either intellectually, and you don't just get that in consciousness, you get that through your whole being.
Mm.
And you get to this point where, oh my God, all of these different domains of myself are also just all one thing.
Mm. That makes me think of the book you had written in the past, wasn't it? The Self You Didn't Want to Realize,
Oh,
something.
yes, right. That's right. Yeah, that was focused on the whole, the ways that we don't want to be the assholes that we are. And so we're like assiduously spiritually trying to purify all assholeness out of ourselves, while, by the way, we are being human animals. You can't really do it. And if you succeed, what you've succeeded at is dividing yourself in half
Mm.
and choosing one side, the side that you think is more pure or more perfect or more acceptable. But on the 9 side of the line, you're like, oh my God, it's all the same thing. Everything I was resisting in myself and others is me.
Mm.
So I'm not resisting it anymore. I'm just letting it be part of me, everything in the world. So that's what you drop into at stage 9. It's this fundamental realization of non separateness between everything, self and others, everything and everything else.
There's a real welcoming of all of that recognition. And so would you say in 9, the needs are just kind of marinating in that recognition? And then,
That's right. That's right. 9 is really an initial awakening into unity. And then not too long after you get into, when you get to the point where you know for a fact that this unity is the reality and you're not losing it anymore, it's not coming and going. 9 is the place of sort of beginning mostly got it there most of the time. And then as you go later in 9, it's like, yeah, it's here all the time, even when I think it's not, because every time I check it is, even when I think it's not. And then you get to the point of, well, like, wait a second. So my body, my consciousness is infinite and is in its own way sort of always perfect and pure, but my body is very finite and limited. How do I reconcile the sort of pure love that I can experience at stage 9 with the very impure kind of love that I experience as a human being? Or how do I reconcile what I think I should be doing with my behavior and my eating or anything else that has to do with regular bodily life? How do I integrate that with what feels like some kind of very pure way of being in my body, in which I'm always being authentic and I'm always expressing what I'm personally here to do and be? How do I get to that? And that begins stage 10. Stage 10 is the reconciliation between the old conditioning, the duality conditioning that we grew up with, and the recognition that duality was an illusion. And we're living in this fundamentally unified awareness, and yet we're acting as if we're not, because the old conditioning is still driving the bus. And that's the dilemma we come into at the beginning of 10. It's like, oh my God, I've got to reconcile these things. I've got to give my whole conditioned being a massive upgrade into this awareness that it's all one thing. I can no longer live my life as if I'm a separate person, transacting interactions as a separate person with other apparently separate people, when I know that it's not even true. It's just obvious that it's not true. So, how do I live in a way that's in integrity with that kind of realization? And
So
so 10 takes you through all of these issues, forces you to heal all your past conditioning about relationships and about the world, and it drops you into reality as it is and out of your head about what you wanted it to be.
so the dropping and the need for reconciliation and integrity is
Yeah.
the way that those are met. First, can you give some suggestions of how people might be met with practices or ways to heal that? Like, what would be the conscious example?
Well, let's say they find themselves whenever somebody gets angry around them. Let's say they get triggered into feeling extremely emotionally uncomfortable. And then because their habit was to, and the conditioning was to avoid the emotions, they would just repress that and feel crappy and think there's something wrong with them. That would be a typical pattern, right? And then as you move through 10, I would, let's say, meet with somebody who seems to be in that place and then help them get out of their head immediately and just be with the physical and emotional and energetic discomforts. Because at that point, having crossed the line into 9, we are able to be fully present, or let's say very deeply present. The places where we're not being very deeply present are these places where we get uncomfortable and we think there's something wrong with pain or discomfort. And therefore, we try scrambling according to the old conditioning to make things more perfect or more acceptable or less uncomfortable. But when you get into 10, you're at this place where, like, I'm sick of that. It never worked for me. It's not working for me. And I have to find a way to be here with all of the regular human stuff of life. So then I would, coach somebody to talk about the things that they previously thought was wrong with them, or that they would previously try to get beyond or past, or they would try to purify out of their system and help them understand. First, I would help them understand that it does not help them and that it's a huge effort that's not really bringing fruit. And then I would give them practices for, let's say, checking in with their actual truth in the moment many times a day. What am I feeling right now? What's present? What else is here? That's just a very simple, almost mindful way of going about things. But at that stage in the process, it puts you more directly in touch with these other parts of your being that you were conditioned to avoid. And so it's very helpful. Um,
And so that brings then eventually with having some practices like that, it reveals the kind of dissociation or splits that have been there so that they could heal and integrate. And where does that tend to move them into what's the stage 11 then?
Yeah, well, what happens is then they start realizing that these relational patterns are so messed up that we were essentially all conditioned out of the possibility of what in Waking Down or Trillium we call mutuality. In other words, we were conditioned out of the idea that everybody has their own reality and all these subjective and different realities are valid. No, we were conditioned into the idea that there's one true reality that's more valid than the other ones. There's an ultimate truth. The guru has that, or somebody's got it, but it's not, probably not us. And when we were growing up, it wasn't us, it was definitely the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so when we get to 10, you start realizing, oh my God, I'm getting triggered here with my partner because she has a different reality. And that makes me uncomfortable. And I've never been able to resolve that. And I don't know what to do with that. And so then I would give them practices that have to do with allowing ourselves to enter the feelings of having a different reality. And there's lots of feelings down in there about that. Huge stuff. And the more you enter the feelings, the more you heal because feeling is healing. Same thing. All we got to do is let ourselves feel these places and they instantly start healing. And when we feel these with other people, we help other people heal. Because most of our wounding, as Gabor Mate beautifully put, we're not mostly traumatized because of the stuff that happened. We're traumatized because we were left alone in
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
it. So in stage 10, a lot of the practices are about no longer staying alone in your stuff. You know, I'm triggered, so I'm walking out of the room so I can process it. No, stay in the room, talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
attract to yourself a partner who wants to be there with you and work through that material. This is a lot of the work that happens in stage 10.
And stage 11, how is that? How is mutuality showing up then in stage 11 in contrast?
Well, let's keep in mind that the way we're defining these stages is that we're taking a completely smooth reality of development and we're artificially imposing a grid on it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why you can see when you look at the model, you'll see that there's this smooth gradation of colors from left to right and from top to bottom. And that is meant to indicate that it is, a continuous process. Some people will enter stage 11 with certain kinds of, they might have a few issues, few glitches still going on in the relational stuff. Some maybe less, some maybe more. But in any case, what happens as you're moving from 10 to 11 is by the end of 10, you're like 80% healed of your duality based conditioning that you got from childhood and growing up. And not just growing up, but really until you came into the unity realization. That whole duality way of thinking and being has fundamentally resolved, and you are now living the life that you experienced on the inside when you awoke into unity. The experience is it's all one thing, but we were behaving as if it's not. When you get to the end of 10, it's like we're behaving as if it's not. Like we have compassion for people. We are able to be vulnerable. We are resilient. We live in the gray zones. We're no longer polarizing our view of the world. We're no longer in the fight of this versus that. We are living in a way of inclusiveness at a very deep level. And so when we get from 10 to 11, the experience is wow, I'm mostly through that stuff. Huh. I thought I was going to be doing that for the rest of my life. I thought that's what spirituality was about, is constantly improving myself. But when you get to this stage, when you get to 11, it's like, geez, it's not about that anymore. I'm fine. I'm enlightened enough, as that other guy said. Thank you for that. That's beautifully put. I'm enlightened enough and I'm healed enough. Now what? Well, that's what 11 is all about. You find yourself going, now what? What am I here for? What's my purpose? What's my unique purpose on this planet? That's what 11 is about. So it's a very sort of uniqueness oriented stage. That's the stage at which, if you haven't already gotten it really clear for yourself what you're here to be doing, your being will be prompting you to get that clear, b- because you have to. You can't do your service and your purpose in the world without knowing who you are and why you're here. So 11 forces you to get that clear.
So 11 is starting to come into the answer to what the purpose of awakening is. Like what
Yes,
it really frees you to be able to do and be in a way.
exactly. Exactly. You find yourself, in fact, fundamentally untangled and liberated into life is the description of 11.
Mm.
You find yourself freed from that stuff that you thought was going to be there forever. And then it's like, okay, I'm liberated into life, but what am I doing in life? And so then whatever your particular thing is, right? If if you're here to like do podcasts, you'll be doing podcasts. If you're here to build chatbot robots, you'll be doing that. If you're here to just sit with people and gaze with them, you'll be doing that. And it's really important for people to get what their personal gifts and strengths are so that they get to this place as you're moving from 11 to 12. See, when you're still at 11, there's fear. If I do what I know I'm here to do, somebody's going to get hurt, and it's probably going to be me. That's the overwhelming feeling. It's like I'm going to get crucified if I follow the prompts in being that I keep getting about what I'm here to do. But then toward the end of 11, it feels like, screw that. I have to just do what I'm here to do and be. If it's scary, it's scary. I don't care anymore. And so as soon as you get that, you have crossed from 11 to 12, and you're at the beginning of 12 where you're just doing your thing. And you're just so doing what you're here to do and be that it's almost like nothing else matters. Yes, other things matter. Of course, you will maintain your relationships and keep making them healthier, but you're doing what you're here to do and be. And you're so immersed in that without any need to like keep examining, am I doing this well enough? Am I spiritual enough? Am I awakened enough? That's over. You lose the spiritual identity when you're entering 12. It just goes away one day. For some people, it's just kind of very rapid. And you're just doing your thing. And the more you just do your thing and are immersed in the activity of what you're here to be and do, um, the more surrendered you are, the less you're controlling your experience, the less you're trying to maintain a comfortable or or known sense of self. And it turns out that the sense of self that we have been living with our whole life was all about control.
Hmm.
It's just control. It's just the part of us that was trying to control. And it was doing that thing. And it was just so there all the time that we identified with it because that's what was in front of us. That's what we were being. So when that identity drops away at the boundary between 12 and 13, it's like, whoa, what just happened? I'm gone. It's like that thing that was the center of my entire life is now just evaporated. And what's left? Only what is happening is all that's left. There's no more of this separate self identity. I'm the person going through this life and having these experiences. It's not that anymore. It's life is happening. It's happening through this body. It's happening as this body. It's happening as everything. It's just happening. There's no more need for me to control it. And there's no more need for me to have an identity about who I am in the midst of it. It's just life doing life. And that's when you land at 13. When that happened for me, I was just driving around the back roads of Northern California in my little Miata and just completely overwhelmed by the beauty of nature and life. Just, day after day, month after month of doing a lot of that. I eventually started coming home and saying to my wife, I'm feeling replaced by life. And then after a week or two of that, it's like, yeah, that replacement of me with life already happened. There's that part of me that is now gone. And thank God, because that is the part that was always getting in the way. You know, life presents a stimulus, and now there's only response. There is no like, let's see, go to the mental database of what's an acceptable behavior and then figure it out. And then, by the time you get to like, okay, yeah, I'll say this, it's too late. The moment's long gone. It's not appropriate anymore. But when you get to 13, it's like, there's no resistance. There's no resistance. And when you realize that, you fall into what I call flow. Flow is the living of non resistance. It's how it feels to live without resistance. It's just happening with no impulse to stop it, and all impulse to empower it in your own particular unique way, whatever you're here to do and be.
Beautifully articulated, Ted. And as far as your experience with being in flow and how oscillations from flow to different stages, since there might be different aspects of oneself that are at different stages too, like
No,
what?
actually, what we're finding is that people are at different places in these different domains when they're younger in the process, like in the dual stage, especially. But as soon as you start getting closer to the unified stage, and definitely when you get in the unified stage, the development between the domains becomes more and more integrated. And you become integrated vertically, you could say, on the chart. All of these parts of you get to be at the same place at the same time by the time you're at 11, pretty much, mostly.
So there's
And
a lot
it's
of
that,
cohesion.
yeah, that capacity for compartmentalizing
Mm-hmm.
goes away.
Wow.
So yeah, by the time you get to 12, 13, um, there isn't another part that is not there with you. It's just life doing life, and we're not seeing it in parts the way we used to see it. It's a
Well,
completely different reality.
what I'm thinking of here is how this segues to our future call with you and Hillary. Maybe we can kind of unpack more of what those stages are in relationship. Like if there's an actual development of a relationship going through an thing. Like,
Exactly. I have
for,
a model for that.
yeah, I'd love to unpack that in that call. I mean, there's so much
Yeah.
um, for those listeners here on the call and replay listeners. We'll be having a call on the 14th of January where Hillary, Ted's partner, will be on with us, and we'll really dive into Ted and Hillary's relationship, emergence, and history, and just what the learnings have been there, and how that applies to the iConscious model. I think that would be really wonderful.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Thanks. Thanks
Well,
for inviting us into that too. That's going to be lots of fun.
yeah, and there's so much richness there. I'd love to have other people be able to receive the benefits from. I'm wondering, Ted, as we're kind of towards the end of the call here, are there any other, since you're an inventor, is there any other inventions that you've got that you've been involved with or that you want to just speak to? Because that's another side of you that hasn't been talked about too much.
Oh, thanks for asking. Um, yeah, there, but I'm not really ready. There are some other inventions I've been working on, but don't like to talk about them until I have established intellectual property.
Ah, okay,
Um, and there's also a next project beyond iConscious that I'm sort of feeling my way toward, um, that I just don't even want to talk about. It's too early.
cool.
So
Well, just
thanks for
want to let
inviting
you
that, but I guess that's
know.
about all I could say.
Yeah. One other thing about the Google X is that you said the moonshot, is that related to getting to the moon? Like,
No, no, no. It's just an expression.
ah,
Skunkworks is another expression. Google has, all its various departments and things that it does, but when they want to start something new and big and important, they put it under the roof of Google X, which
ah,
means this is where we develop the new stuff.
okay. Because
And
when I heard you say that moonshot, I was like, wow, is this? I mean, that's uncanny. If your dad was into rock and you're you're
yeah,
doing something with Google that's connected somehow to space, I find that super fascinating. But it's a different
yeah,
kind of
different kind of moonshot. Yeah. different kind of moonshot. In this case, they are starting to understand that it's going to be a moonshot project in its own right to be able to accurately assess and coach people using AI.
Mm.
And that's where they're focusing. That's where we're focusing with them.
Well, wow, I'm just kind of taking in how much ground was covered in this call, both of your personal life unfoldment, the treasure of a life you've had in inquiry and exploring what it is to be a human being, and then all the projects and teaching and gifts you've brought forward as a result of that, and what's happening with iConscious now too. It's pretty amazing, pretty amazing what you've shared here.
Hmm.
I want to open up the conversation for Jordan or Molly or Vanessa or Jesse and Ivana who have been here. If there's any other questions or comments, anything you guys want to say as are heading towards a close here in the call. Jesse's coming into the circle here. She might have to say. Molly, go ahead.
If you're able to hear me, my reception's been kind of shoddy. My
Yep.
question is regarding, so whenever you say you give up control, is that another word for certainty and your need to know things? Is that
Yes.
in stage 11?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
definitely.
it's that like elucidate that, yeah, it's not you're not really in control, but okay, so it's the need to know and that.
Whoops, lost you there. Whoop.
Oh,
The need to know. You were
Just repeat that last part about the need to know.
that you're releasing that in 11.
That's right. You're
Okay.
releasing the need to know. You're
Okay.
also releasing the need
Molly.
to have any
Yeah.
expectations about outcomes because truly we're not in control of most of them. We only have marginal control over some of our personal functions, but the rest of the universe is completely out of our control. And most of life is the rest of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, all of that. We just let go of like, I'm just doing in this moment what I'm doing without even thinking about it. It's just happening through me. No need to plan it out. No need to make anything conform to my ideas or expectations or hopes. Yep, a lot of times the universe is just going to take a direction that I don't like, but I can't, I'm not personally in control of that. So there's nothing in me that attempts to take control of that or resist what's happening.
And then from like a loving place, you would speak up, and if somebody is being dismissive or arguing, or you would speak up and say no. And it would hurt you because you realize that by
Right.
being angry towards somebody else, you're hurting yourself too, right?
Exactly. In
Okay,
fact,
right,
that whole impulse starts at the unified phase. When you really
right.
start getting that others are part of you, well, all of a sudden you can't abuse others because they're part of you. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely true.
So, Ted, when we were talking earlier about TM and the just kind of the whole goal of that awakening with accessing the infinite and living from that place, there's an element that kind of connects to living in flow of the degree of surrender and life living as you without
Yeah.
that control, but it's a very different orientation. Can you speak a little bit to how it's different and how it's similar?
How it's similar to what?
Uh, as far as the transcendental orientation of
Oh.
like in one way, that orientation was to leave all of the body, the mind, the personality, all that, and to access a degree of the infinite
Hmm.
life. But flow is a very, very different form of that. Would you say? Wouldn't you say?
Yes. What I'm calling flow is a very different thing. If you are excluding anything of life from your experience that is coming toward you, then that's resistance. That's the opposite of flow. And you can have a very glorious, huge, brilliant realization of the infinite while still resisting any one or more parts of the finite, and it's not going to feel remotely like what I'm calling flow. You wouldn't even know what that, what flow really is until you got to this place of including everything and resisting nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't know it, because if you think that all there is consciousness and the rest of this is an illusion, you would be living inside of your own illusion, which would, it's painful. It might take a while to get it. It can be, there's a lot of ways that we are great at fooling ourselves about those sorts of things. But sooner or later, you become awake enough to notice, there are some issues. And by the way, some of my friends in mutuality here are giving me feedback about the impact I'm having on them.
Right,
And
right.
it's not so good. Just sort of the relief valve that mutuality provides when you're
Yeah,
practicing that in a community.
right, right. Vanessa, was there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, just wondering if the higher, a sense of a higher self, is that higher self anywhere riding in that flow in those last stages, or is it fully integrated and there's no like observer role that's taking
Right.
place?
Right. There's no observer. The observer is specifically what goes away. Yeah, it's all integrated. There's, like in my experience right now, it's, there's all these layers. It's obvious it's all here. Yeah, the infinite, it's all here. It's all part of the same thing. And there's nothing in me that makes me feel like um, I'm transcendent or anything remotely like that, because there's nothing in me that's going I. It's just the words are coming out. That's all. I say
Like
stuff. I do
isness,
stuff.
an isness of things.
Yeah, the isness of things is just doing its. Everything is just doing its thing. It's kind of like it always was, right? It was us who we were the ones trying to control the world and ourselves and each other. But we get to this place where there's no impulse at all. It's just gone, because it just became, and it's not even a willful mental thing. The more you give service in the world, the less you have time to sit around and think about how you're going to control your experience to make it the way you want it. So you just kind of unwillingly, or not, I wouldn't say unwillingly, in an unwilled way, you just fall into this singular recognition. And what previously felt like a me going through the world, even an awakened me in the unified faith going through the world, it just goes away. And all that's left is the world,
Hmm.
not me, just the world. No, I'm not separate, but I don't need to define myself as separate, because it's also obviously not true. So yeah, it's just the world happening is how it feels.
And would you say ordinary in a way?
Totally. Well, I mean, it's both, right? Ordinary is not separate from extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the same thing.
Welcome, Natalie and Heron. We've been talking the last 2.5 hours. Actually, we went a little over 2 hours here. Sorry about that, Ted.
No,
Uh,
it's fine. I've been into it. This has been great.
cool. Well, we've been exploring the iConscious Global, the model that Ted was been talking about here, and awakening, and so much. If you guys didn't catch the earlier part of the call, you can always listen to the replay. Um, I think I'd like to just speak a little bit here as we're closing about future calls. In 2 weeks, we're going to be having Samuel and Linda on the call on the 31st at 11 o'clock. And we'll be diving into Samuel and Linda's experience and Samuel's founding the work of Waking Down in Mutuality and how things have evolved since then for him and Linda. And then on the 14th, as we mentioned earlier, Ted and Hillary, Hillary is Ted's partner, they're going to be on the call, and we're going to explore a lot about relationship and awakened relationships. And I'm super stoked about that call too. On the 28th of January, we're meeting with Linda and going to really dive into Linda's experience and relationship with specifically awakening for women. I'm really curious about what she has to say about that. On February 11th, we're going to be meeting Jeff Olsner, who is a mentor for a long time in Waking Down and Trillium Awakening. And yeah, there's just so much to go there into as well, with Jeff talking about parenting and mentoring and being a musician and poet and philanthropist, and there's a lot to explore in that call. Margit will be meeting on the 25th of February, and Margit is currently a Trillium Awakening teacher, and she's done a lot of exploration around awakened service and awakened leadership that we'll be diving into on that call. And then we've got June Kanapka on the 25th of March, exploring Hakomi and somatic awareness, shamanism, and Trillium Awakening. She's a Trillium Awakening teacher that's incorporated a lot of elements into her working with people. And then we'll be meeting Steve Boggs on April 8th and diving into his unique contributions to heart awakening. And all of these individuals, I think you're just going to love, like, and all very, very unique in what they bring to the conversation around what is awakening and what does it mean to be wholly human. So that's the rest of our series for Waking Down Mutuality and Trillium Awakening is a lot of interviews and discussion. We'll probably have another call too for just kind of digesting all the material too as a group. But that's what's up on the horizon. And yeah, I just want to thank Ted again for being here. Thank you so much for sharing this, sharing your time and just your life's work, bringing that forward into the space here so that we could receive it and learn from you. And yeah, just thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Eric. I really also appreciate your skill in sort of drawing me out and asking great questions. So thanks for making this happen.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Sure. And Ivana said thank you, and Molly said thank you in the chat. And Jane says she's going to listen to the replay as well. And John, I think, is going to come back around as well and listen to the replay. So, yeah, thank you, everybody. You're welcome to unmute if you want, Jordan and Vanessa, and say goodbye, and then I'll close out the room. Bye, Ivana and Jesse and Aaron.
Bye, everybody.
Much.
Bye, Vanessa. Bye, Jordan. And we'll see you later, Ted.
Okay, take care.